So when you get into lesson 20, it starts talking about these things called functions. And functions really are just a way for you to be able to simplify your program. Without your functions, you can still run these programs. So I jumped here into lesson number 9 here that I already did. So lesson 20, puzzle 9. And when you look at this, it's actually a really, really simple function that they actually already wrote for you. And the idea of really almost all of lesson 20 is that you're reading what these functions are that they have pre-written for you. Usually the functions are good and there's nothing you need to change about it. You just need to be able to read it. So sometimes you have those little quizzes where it shows you a formula and you have to like predict what that formula is going to do. That's essentially what you're doing with this function. So if you read this and say, okay, this little function that's called ClearPath, what does it do when I call that function? And calling is just when you pull this over and use it. Oh, okay. It destroys a block and moves forward. It places gravel. That happens to be for this Minecraft entire level. So if I just do that function once or call that function one time, I can actually kind of experiment and see what it does once, knowing that, all right, now if I just repeat that a whole bunch of times, which I think this one happens to be 7 times, it's going to go through here. And this is sort of a weird program here because you're really just trying to get this little character to go through and clear the path for you to be able to use these arrow tools and move your other guy up here, right? And that's really your ultimate goal for this particular one. The idea here is, what do functions do, though? So if I switch over to now lesson 21, where you start getting a little bit more complicated, you're starting to try and figure out sort of a function mixed with conditionals. So I've got my conditionals in here, my checking for corn or the if statements, all of these previously learned on previous lessons. All right, so I'm looking at this one, number 12. I believe this was a challenge. And if I go through this, these functions, again, I need to be able to sort of read what these do. As a tip, I would move these over so that you can kind of read them all on one screen. If this is too much, you just press this little less button. It gives you a little more space to work over here. And I've already showed you this. You can drag these things to give you sort of more programming space. For this particular one, I've got a function here that, all right, it checks for corn, all right? It checks for pumpkin, gets pumpkin. This one happens to move around. And I can write out a big formula here that would use these functions and call these functions to be able to figure this whole thing out. But really, the most efficient way is to create yet another function. All right, and I'm going to call this one, let's just call this square or pumpkin square or, we're just going to call it square. All right, and now within this function that I'm going to create, really this one is going to be going along and deciding how do I do an entire square's worth of formulas here. So some of that is going to be, let's see, go in here. I'm going to repeat 4 times. Where's my loops here? Repeat this 4 times because the square has 4 sides. I'm going to pick along the path. So I'm going to pull that function that's already been in here. I pick a long path. I'm going to turn right. Actions, turn right. Move that there. And now I have something that will go along and pick along the path, which will then go up here and do pick for pumpkins, which then pulls. So you see these functions are sort of pulling from each other or calling from each other. They're all interactive. If you were to draw arrows between these, it gets a little confusing. But every time you see a green little puzzle piece here, you know you're calling a function, which is referring to something else over here. So if I were to go up here and say, you know what, I want to do a function that is my square function. And then at the end of that, I know I need to turn right. Oops, let's turn right. And I'm actually going to go ahead and do it again. So I'm going to pull my square function. When I run this, what it's doing is it's going through here and going through, pulling the different functions, running around. It ran the square function. Then I turned right, and I'm running the same square function around again. And you can see that's how it ends it. So it's a little bit challenging, but really if you get in there and see how the functions interact with each other, you'll be able to sort of figure